Issue 2. Is Ron Paul's revolution now at hand?
My views are quite different than the other candidates, so they would just as soon us not get the coverage that the others are getting.
Well, as it turns out, Congressman Ron Paul of Texas is getting more coverage and more votes for his libertarian views than are the establishment Republicans. Paul finished a close second in last week's Ames, Iowa straw poll. Paul was less than 200 votes shy of beating out the straw poll winner, Iowa native and Minnesota Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. That's a difference of 152 votes out of a total of roughly 17,000 votes cast. Congressman Paul had already won the Conservative Political Action Conference straw poll in February, the largest conservative gathering of the year. Paul also won the Southern Republican Leadership Conference straw poll in April. Why is Paul gaining traction? He says it's the rise of libertarianism.
Time has come around to the point where the people are agreeing with much of what I've been saying for 30 years. So I think the time is right.
Congressman Paul may be right if you define libertarianism as minimal government in political, social, and economic affairs. A recent poll shows that 63%, practically a consensus of Americans, believe that the federal government interferes too much with individuals and too much with businesses. The national debt is now more than $14 trillion.
Question, is Ron Paul right? Are Americans too focused on individual autonomy and too little on the nanny state?
I think Ron Paul's right about a lot of things, and the nanny state as a problem is a big part of it. And it's not just a nanny state where new regulations telling us, for instance, we have to buy health insurance, or or on the local level, all the nanny state stuff, but it's also the government that's way too big, the taxes that are way too high, and the foreign policy that's way too aggressive. And I think those poll numbers showed that a lot of Americans are agreeing with him, and that Obama and most of the Republicans are on the wrong side of those questions.
I read your column on him, and I didn't think you particularly liked him. You called him a gadfly.
And that's a great word. That's a word of praise. There's these big horses, which is the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and they need a gadfly stinging them.
You think he's a gadfly?
Well, in a way he is, but look, I think Ron Paul is a principled, honorable guy, and his time basically, I think, has come for his ideas. Two of them, John. He is the guy that put the Federal Reserve and monetary policy on the table that Rick Perry is picking up. And secondly, the whole idea of interventionism, an American empire, bring the troops home and cut the defense budget.
Yeah.
You got an anti-war, anti-interventionist conservative, and he's making hay with it.
Do you think Rick Perry stole the oxygen out of the room and left kind of Ron Paul out there just hanging there?
Ron Paul is a libertarian, and there's a significant portion of the Republican Party that holds libertarian views. He could not get elected nationally in this country. He ought to run on the libertarian ticket. I agree with some of the things he's brought forward, but he's not going to go like his anti-war attitudes. But
how about his immigration policy?
I'm not sure what his immigration policy is, to tell you the truth. So, okay, well, he's not my candidate, but he's a welcome addition in the debates. He's a civil debater, and he brings some interesting ideas, but he's not going to go the distance, and the media are basically ignoring him.
Is Ron Paul's time come?
Well, I think in this sense it has come. I think he has always argued against interventionist government, and we have had 3 or 4 years now in which we've had a massive increase in the intervention of the government in our economy and our medical system, etc., and it hasn't worked. If it had worked, there may be a different reaction, but the sense is it hasn't worked, and therefore his arguments, in a sense, have much more traction than they've had in a long time.
Do you think the size of our national debt is an indication of our over-reliance on the central government and less on the principles of sound principles, at least, of capitalism?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the sound principles of capitalism had a lot of problems. I mean, take in the 1930s, you know, the sound principles of capitalism produced a depression. The government's role to intervene in certain parts of the economy in particular has been very constructive. The question is it appropriate now, and to the degree that it has been done, was it properly done? Answer. And I don't believe it was.
Is Washington too big?
Yes, I think it is.
Much too big?
Well, much too big, whatever you want to call it.
You think the Founding Fathers envisioned that? Granted, you know, they lived a couple of hundred years ago, but I think they envision anything like Washington being as big as it now is.
I
Not
don't
even
think
close.
they envisioned anything
I'm talking
like
about
they
the
saw
regulatory
America
agency.
being
No,
weighted.
no.
The regulatory
I'm talking about the
agencies-
White House. I'm also talking about the power of the Congress.
We have totally different conditions. The government has to address some of them. The question is, how intelligently and competently do they do it? And frankly, it hasn't been done
Do
competently.
you think the government is too big?
Oh, of course, John. It's enormous. The government is enormous. It's not just the New Deal, but the Great Society.
Is
on
that
top of it.
identified by the size of the
It's a
national
welfare.
debt?
It's a welfare
In defense
warfare
of
state, and
government.
both got to
Welfare
come down.
warfare
In defense
state?
of
Both are
government-
coming down.
In defense of government, Pat wouldn't give up a single of the benefits that he gets, and most people feel the same way. And I think
don't
when you
agree
talk
with
about
that.
Listen, I
spending,
certainly
I don't
would.
agree with
he
that.
wouldn't give
Medicare,
up Social Security,
Medicaid.
Medicare. No, he wouldn't
Don't
give
you
up
think
any of
those
those
are the
things.
third
and
rail?
Don't you think
shouldn't.
it's a shame that I'm paying
No.
for Pat's Social Security and Medicare?
Now, what am
that's
I
part of the
You can
problem.
handle it, and the founding fathers did not envision a country where you had the right to be sick and go bankrupt. The health care intervention on the part of the government is a positive thing because the unfettered capitalist system wasn't working.
Issue 3.